Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I'm Ibrahim Naimi. I'll be the moderator of this session this morning, and the title of our session is Education and Change in the Arab World. No one could have predicted that in the space of few months, the death by self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi, a 26-year-old Tunisian struggling to make a living as a fruit vendor, would have sent such shockwaves around the Arab world. That single act of desperation has led to the toppling of dictators and unleashed demands for political freedom. It also captured the sense of humiliation, hopelessness, and resentment experienced by millions of young Arabs. Education failures are deeply implicated in the Arab world's political crisis. Governments across the Arab world have invested heavily in education, and the past decade has witnessed a rapid expansion in primary, secondary, and even tertiary education. Yet the results have been disappointing. Schools and universities are turning out graduates lacking the skills they need to succeed in employment markets. And the employment market itself is hamstrung by economic mismanagement. The result, high levels of education with mass unemployment. The power of demography should not be underestimated. The Arab world is young. Nearly 1 in 5 people, around 85 million in total, are aged 15 to 24. For countries with a young population, the immediate challenge is to generate the skills and economic opportunities that bring hopes of employment, security, and rising living standards. That hope was denied to Mohammed Bouazizi, and it is missing in the lives of millions of young people in the region. This is the region with the world's highest youth unemployment rate. 1 in 4 young people are out of work. In Tunisia, the youth unemployment rate is 31%. In Egypt, it is 34%. Young people have waited an exceptionally long time before finding their first job. Economists have even coined a term for the lengthy transition from education to work. They call it the waithood. We have childhood and we have the waithood. The average delay amounts to 3 years in Morocco and over 2 years in Egypt. The past 2 decades have witnessed dramatic advances in primary and secondary school enrollment, with a clear increase in tertiary education. Many governments have increased public spending on education. The 7% of GDP that Tunisia invests in the sector puts the country near the top of the global league table for financial effort. So what went wrong? Why are our education systems in the Arab world perform so badly? Why have so much education and public investment failed to create a virtuous cycle of economic growth, employment creation, and expanded youth opportunities? With this rather lengthy introduction, and with these questions in our minds, I'm honored to share these concerns with the 3 of the top Arab experts in the field of education in the Arab world. Let us welcome our speakers in this session. Dr. Tariq Youssef, CEO of Silatic in Qatar and founding Dean of Dubai School of Government. Dr. Mohammed Faour, Senior Associate at Carnegie Middle East Center in Lebanon. Mr. Salah Kandari, Manager of Consumer Services, MENA, and E4E. It's not I4I, it's E4E. He's going to talk about it later. E4E project, leader at IFC World Bank in United Arab Emirates. I will start with Mr. Kandari, who is going to talk about the relation between the education in the Arab countries and the employment agenda in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with a disclaimer. I always wanted to go for a PhD in my life, but I never had the courage nor the time to do it. So when I learned that Dr. Tariq and Dr. Muhammad will be on this panel, I asked the chair to go first before my fellow panelists put the bar very high for me. So my remarks will primarily focus on the link between the education outcome and the growing youth unemployment, especially among the graduates. And before doing so, I would like to invite you to watch a 3-minute video on this subject.
The Arab world is overwhelmingly young and has the highest youth unemployment in the world and the lowest participation rate in the world. Youth unemployment costs the Arab region $40 to $50 billion every year. Why is this happening? It's not just a lack of jobs. It's that education is not giving youth the skills they need. But in order to address the demand, we need better options. Neither public nor private education alone can address the need, and they leave students unprepared for the job market. Vocational education and training is helping to prepare students for specific jobs, but doesn't reach enough people. And the number of youth needing jobs continues to grow. We have a better idea. Education for employment, providing skills that are relevant to the marketplace. We have clear opportunities for education for employment and a clear role for the private sector. Vocational education and training and work readiness programs have a bigger role to play. University education can make what they're teaching more relevant to employers. To realize this potential, we will need strong industry backing to help shape the curriculum, to provide faculty with industry experience, to offer internships, and to utilize simulation labs to train new workers. Educators will need to provide more application-based learning that goes beyond theory to real-world scenarios. Students also need to learn soft skills like problem solving to help them negotiate the workplace. And they'll need career counseling and guidance to help transition to the workplace. So how do we get there? We need our stakeholders to work together. Industry, educators, and government must work to provide standards and quality assurance. Students must get more early work experience before pursuing a career. And students, educators, and industry must connect with each other to share ideas and information. It's time to start a conversation. By creating a network between Arab youth, industry, and educators, we can begin to have immediate impact. It's time to realize Arab youth potential. 50 to 70 million youths will enter the job market in the coming years. E4E will help get them ready to perform.
So let me just share a few bullet points before we start our discussion, and I will try to be brief given the time constraint. I mean, as you have seen in the video, these are alarming statistics. 1 out of 4 young people who are able and looking for work cannot find a job. If you look at the female job seeker, the situation is even worse. More than 30% is the unemployment rate among female graduates. And let me highlight the magnitude of the challenge that the Arab countries are facing. The region needs to create some 35 to 40 million jobs just to maintain the same current unemployment rate. It needs to create another 15 million to reduce the unemployment rate to the global average. And on top of this, the Arab region will need to create some 40 to 45 million additional jobs if it wants to increase the workforce participation from 35% to the 50% global average. While demand for education for employment is substantial in the region, the supply of relevant post-secondary education is very nascent in the region. Overall, only 15 to 20% of the students are enrolled in private institutions, while in Brazil it is 75%, in a country like Malaysia it is 50%. So the region is facing a massive education for employment supply challenge that I would like to break into 4 main challenges. I mean, the first challenge is a relevance challenge. In addition to the lack of hard skills in certain discipline and in certain subjects, most employers are express dissatisfaction with their employees' skills, namely the soft skills, or what we call the 21st century skills. Things like problem solving, critical thinking, teamwork, cooperating, communication skills is missing in the region. The second challenge is a mixed challenge. Most of the graduates from high school go to higher education. So only 20% are in vocational education and training, and this is much lower than other regions. In Latin America, it's 36%, in Asia, it's 26%, and in countries like Malaysia, it's in excess of 40%. The third challenge is a quantity challenge. Of the 7.5 million postgraduate students, 50 of those are in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Algeria, and this represents some 2,200 postgraduate students for 100,000 people in the region. And this is much lower than countries like Turkey, Brazil, and Singapore, with the average is approximately 3,500 students per 100,000. The final challenge is a delivery challenge. The region's predominant method for delivery of education is still based on memorization and lecture-based. There is very little opportunity for group work, practice learning, such as simulation labs and internship. So in parallel to these challenges, there are 3 critical enablers that are missing in the education ecosystem. And I'm referring to the standard and independent quality assurance, funding mechanism for students and young entrepreneurs, and finally, information transparency and matchmaking between employers and students are not yet there. So let me stop here, and then I can elaborate on some of these during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Salahuddin. Now I'll give the floor to Dr. Mohammed Faour, who will address the issue of the education reform in the Arab world and its connection to the 21st century skills and market needs. Dr. Faour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello. Let me first make the following note. When we study Arab world, we have to note substantial differences between countries and substantial differences and significant differences within countries. So although generally speaking we can talk about the failure of education reform in most Arab countries, there will be important variations between one country and another. Within the same country, you'll also find substantial variations between, say, urban and rural areas, and between public and private schools, and I'm focusing on K-12 education. As my colleagues earlier said, that a lot of investment and state budgets have gone into education reform. There are probably education reform initiatives in almost all Arab countries. They did create important and impressive gains in expansion of the system, particularly at primary education and to some extent secondary education. The problem, however, remains in the quality of education, particularly when we look at performance indicators, teachers' status and qualifications, assessment of teaching, and citizenship skills, and generally the 21st century skills. Unfortunately, the results of international standardized tests like TIMSS, PEARLS, PISA, and I'm going to focus more on TIMSS because more Arab countries have participated in this international test in math and science for grade 4 and 8. All Arab countries, with no exception, scored below scale average. And they did that in both 2003 and 2007, the most recent data that we have. Even the most proficient students in some of the Arab countries that did better than others fared less than the average performing student in the best performing countries. So there we have a lot of problems, although there are significant variations between countries, like some countries scored below 350 and when the average is 500, while some other countries scored on average 460, 470, something like that. The major problems with education reform here, when we talk about quality, I'd like to highlight the following shortcomings. One, with regard to governance. There is a problem with governance at both the central level and the school level. The central level, I'm talking about ministries of education, where you don't have the competent leadership and you don't have the vision and strategic planning and efficiency of supervisory units. You have also problems with management at the school level, and quality does not come with poor governance. You need good governance to have high quality of education. The second and critical aspect is teachers. The teachers' problem last year, His Excellency Abdullah Al-Thani mentioned clearly the call for improving the status of teachers in the Arab countries. And this is really a critical issue. When it comes to social status, financial status, teachers in all the Arab countries in general have a lower status than other countries, with variations again between and within countries. Teachers we need teachers who are creative, teachers who can update their skills all the time, who are willing to adapt to different situations, who can accommodate students of various needs, teachers who are enthusiastic and dedicated to the profession and can go through in-service, pre-service, and professional development training. This component is very important, and it's a weak point in the education systems across the Arab countries. Another important issue is the delivery methods that are being used, and my colleague already talked about the emphasis on rote learning and memorization rather than critical thinking, problem solving. When we talk about 21st century skills, or what the EU calls key competences for lifelong learning, this include communication in the native language and in foreign languages, basic competence in math, science, technology. It also includes digital competence. It includes the sense of initiative and entrepreneurship. It includes social and civic competence, as well as cultural awareness and expression. If we want to see what kind of skills our students and graduates have, we find that many of these skills are missing. As to the skills and the mismatch between those skills and the needs of the market, I will leave this to my other colleagues who will probably talk more about it.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Our third speaker is Dr. Tariq Youssef, who will speak to you about the opportunities and challenges that face the education in the Arab countries in the wake of the Arab Spring.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. And thanks to Salah ad-Din and Mohammed for, I think, outlining the contours of the agenda for education reform. My comments will be on precisely what you identified, and that is the opportunities and the challenges on account of what has happened in the region in the last year. I actually happen to be of the view that the Arab Spring is possibly the best thing that could have happened to the agenda for education reform in the Arab world. This is an agenda with very little success, measured success in the last 10 years, very little traction, moderate support, no sustained investments. The Arab Spring could possibly help elevate the agenda to where it ought to be, and that is in thinking of education reform as a long-term commitment by our governments and societies to change. Now, why would the Arab Spring make this possible? Why would, in fact, the Arab Spring create the conditions for education reform to have traction? I think many of the symptoms discussed earlier that have to do with low educational achievements, weak outcomes, whether they happen to be in labor markets, such as high unemployment rates amongst the educated, skill mismatches, dropouts, low scores on tests, reflect the mix of incentives and institutions within our societies and within our countries. These are not incentives and institutions that were born overnight. These are long-standing, deeply embedded signals on which we have built our educational systems. At the individual level, one can think of deeply rooted incentives that have conditioned students to prepare for a test, to seek a diploma. One can think of deeply embedded institutions such as guarantees for job security and regulations that inhibit the employment of quality workers in the private sector. One can even think of incentives and signals sent at the individual and family level, norms and expectations about what it takes to be a successful participant in society. How do you prepare for it, and the effects of that on lifelong learning, seeking skills, and thinking of education as a journey in life and one that you have to be engaged in. If you start accepting the premise that at the heart of any program for education reform is the reform of incentives and institutions at the individual, family, organizational, and government level, then what you need are really comprehensive, serious commitments to education reform. These are not easy reform projects. They create a lot of short-term uncertainty, anxiety. They run into resistance. They're not popular. The gains from them are typically long-term gains. They're not to be realized in months, but in years. The Arab Spring creates the possibility for comprehensive change, because the agenda for education reform can now become truly a societal agenda with legitimacy, with support, and in a moment when the Arab world, at least in a number of countries, is seeking to remake itself and to rebuild the institutions and to rebuild the norms of accountability and transparency at the school level, but also at the reform level. I think from that perspective, the Arab Spring could very well provide the impetus for comprehensive, ambitious reforms of our education systems in a way that we had not been able to do in at least 50 years. Don't get me wrong here. This is not just going to be about the countries that have gone through revolutionary change. This could possibly also affect the countries that remain stable. I think expectations have now been raised. The benchmark for success will be elevated. And these countries, by virtue of their proximity and cultural affinity with the other countries going through profound change could very well find themselves also pursuing grand projects of education reform, which start from the school and the teacher, but go all the way up to the accountability of governments and their seriousness and commitments to a long-term process of change, whose fruits and whose results in the short term might be untenable, might be unpredictable, might be uncertain, but one, as most of the speakers in the plenary session suggested earlier, ought to be the prime focus of our societies and hopefully will be the prime focus of our governments.